Hello everyone. So today we're going to finish off the chapter 3 that we have been not doing for a week. In part 1, this chapter is called Having an Experience, and in part 1 we talked about what is a completed experience and what is a consummatory experience and what is an incompleted experience. Today we're going to talk about when art becomes a real art and how art should be viewed and appreciated. And John Dewey starts off like this. Various experiences have a common patterns, and that is, the outline of the common pattern is set by the fact that every experience is the result of interaction between a live creature and some aspect of the world in which he or she lives. So, experience is consisted of doing and undergoing. So, undergoing, which is receiving, and doing is an active gesture. So experience is the rhythm that it creates, rhythm and balance between doing and undergoing. And the quality of the experience is determined with the perception of the relation between doing and underdoing. So it needs the balance. And when the balance is well balanced, the quality of the experience is very high. There are two cases where experience cannot be a real experience, a good consummatory experience. Of course, the one is the experience that is only consistent with the doings, and the other one is, of course, the experience that is only consistent with receiving. So I will cite this part for you. 46. Okay, so the first case where experience is only consistent with doings, zeal for doing, lust for action leaves many a person, especially in the hurried and impatient human environment in which we live, with experience of an almost incredible paucity, all on the surface. No one experience has a chance to complete itself because something else is entered upon so speedily. What is called experience becomes so dispersed and miscellaneous as hardly to deserve the name. Resistance is treated as an obstruction to be beaten down, not as an invitation to reflection. So basically we're trying to do as many things as possible in a short amount of time for the sake of it, and not trying to have a time where you ruminate over the fact that this has happened and what does this mean? How should I go forward? Should I stop for a second? You don't have that process. You don't have a pause process. You just do. In that case, it cannot be a completed consummatory experience. And the other one on the polar opposite is, of course, that only has receiving part. You are just so passively receiving what you think you should be receiving and not doing anything. And he says, experiences are also cut short from maturing by excess of kept receptivity. What is prized is then the mere undergoing of this and that, irrespective of perception of any meaning. The crowding together of as many impressions as possible is thought to be life, even though no one of them is more than fleeting and sipping. The sentimentalist and the daydreamer may have more fancies and impressions pass through their consciousness than has the man who is animated by the lust for action. So, we need a balance. We cannot just do, and we cannot just receive and receive and receive. We need to have a rhythm. And so the real consummatory experiences consist of the well balance between the doings and receiving. And he goes on and talk about what thinking intelligently actually means. And by that he says this. Thinking intelligently is perceiving the relationship between what is done and what is undergone. What I just said now. You need the time to think about what has happened, what I've done, what I've received. Should I go, stop, back off a little bit? Having this time is critical. So this is thinking intelligently. And then, thinking means apprehending the relationship between doing and receiving. So it's great that you have those parts like doing part and then undergoing part. But if you don't understand the relationship between these two, you're not thinking. So you need to think. For example, things have consequences. Let's say someone hit me, and of course then I will be pissed, and then I will do an active thing. I could go for many options, but let's say I decided to actively punch this person back because I got punched by this person. Then I've done something. So I've done the doing part of the experience, and the receiving part was done in the beginning. So we get into this fight and whatever, and then things happened. We both are hospitalized, and then we think about like why this happened. Like if we don't think, this is a bad example, by the way. Better example would be when you're little, like you like some kids, including me. I one time pulled out like $1 worth of money out of my mom's wallet, and of course I'll have consequence of that. And then when the consequences hit me, I learned that, oh, you never take money from your mom's wallet, things like that. So like you need to connect the doing part and then undergoing part, and then you need to merge this, and then you need to have intellectually you have to go through a thinking process that is intellectual, because you create a meaning within it. So then he talks about artists and the process of the artist who is working on their artwork. So the reason why is because just like the experience that requires doing and undergoing, artist himself, herself also needs to not just create, but to appreciate his or her painting or any kind of artwork that they are creating, and they need to go to a certain point where they are happy with their work. And in that process, creating and seeing what they've been doing, that connection is also very relevant. And because of that, if you think that thinking or thinking intellectually is only done in words or specific materials and only by symbols and numbers, then you are thinking very narrowly, because thinking intellectually can be done also in images, colors, and other mediums. So artists, they are the type of people who think in that type of materials. And the difference that you find between different artists of their artworks is because they think differently. They make the connections between what they've done and what they've gone through in a different ways. For example, if I break up with someone, I will at least try to have some lessons from it, because even though everybody's different, if I went through a breakup, then I will have some sort of lesson, like, oh, maybe next time I will do this and that, whatever. And let's say there's other type of people who don't think about that and who just break up and then like they don't get any lesson from it, and then meet people. Then of course I will at least gain, like, I will improve basically. But if you don't think and if you just go forward without making the relations and creating that meaning within, then it can be very, very, very time consuming, energy consuming, everything consuming. And basically don't do that. It's dumb to do that. And then yeah, it's an important part. But before the important part, he explains the definition of the aesthetics. And we've gone through this before, but aesthetics is no intruder in experience from without, whether by the way of idle luxury, of transcendent ideality, but that is that is the clarified and intensified development of traits that belong to every normal, complete experience. So basically, it's very difficult. It's explained in this fancy way, but to put it in an easy way is basically our aesthetics are everywhere in our life. It's not the possession of special experience. Aesthetics are everywhere if we try to find it, is what he wants to say. And this is the important part from this chapter. There's a word we use, artistic and aesthetics. And with artistic, we think of it as active and doing part of the adjective, because artistic means basically you're doing something artistic. Like you have to do something artistic, not something that's given to you. Like you need to do, it's an act of doing. Whereas aesthetics is more on the perspective of the viewer, like you appreciate the aesthetics of it, so it's more of the consumer view. But John Dee wants to say that it's a pity that there's no word that combines these two, because they are not separate, is what he wants to say. There is no word that combines these two. That's one of the reasons why we think art is so separate from our lives. And he wants to talk about the relationship between the artistic and the aesthetic, and he explained it quite well. So I'll read out the part. Artistic art denotes a process of doing or making. Every art does something with a physical material, the body or something outside of the body, with or without the use of intervening tools, and with a view to production of something visible, audible, or tangible. So marked is the active or doing phase of art. That is, dictionaries usually define it in terms of skilled action, ability, and execution. And then the aesthetic refers, as we have already noted, to experience as appreciative, perceiving, and enjoying. It denotes the consumer's rather than the producer's standpoint. He says this, but he says, let's say there is a chef who makes incredibly delicious and beautiful cuisine. Then he or she is the creator. He's the one who's on the artistic side. And the consumer side, who's eating that cuisine and dish, whatever, is the one who's appreciating, so they find the aesthetics within it. But in the nutshell, in a very superficial level, it could be seen like there is a creator, there is one who's appreciating it. But if we look deeper into it, we can see that these two are combined, because when the chef is creating, when making that food, that dish, he or she needs to constantly see, like, not just making, but see whether he or she likes the taste of it, likes the look of it. So the act of creating and appreciating is circulating. And that's what he wants to say. It's not a separate experience. Artistic and aesthetics, it's a combined experience. So he wants to say that what's really important in art is not the pursuit of the perfection, but how much attention the artist was concerned to pour into his or her work for it to be shared with the viewers who will experience his or her art. So it's not about just like being beautiful, being perfect, because if you want perfection, you can go to a factory. And then next part is when art becomes a real art. Just like in the experience, consummatory experience, you need the balance between the action and the reception. Just like that, in art also, you need the creating part, but also the receiving part of your artwork. What that means is, wait a second. Yeah. The doing or making is artistic when perceived results is of such a nature that its qualities as perceived have controlled the question of the production. The act of producing that is directed by intent to produce something that is enjoyed in the immediate experience or perceiving has qualities that a spontaneous or uncontrolled activity does not have. So, the artist embodies in himself the attitude of the perceiver while he works. So, just like the chef example that I just gave you, artists also need to think of the perceiver, whether this artwork, how this artwork can be conveyed to him. So this kind of proves the fact that within the contemporary artists who just like do it without thinking about the perceiver, for John Dewey, that's not an art. And he gives another example, which I think is quite a good one, that to make a point when art, what is art and what is not an art. So imagine there is a beautiful object that we found somewhere in the nature. And up until so far, we've believed that this beautiful object was a creation and the creature of this primitive, what do you call it? Primitive, like American, like, let's say we thought it to be a product of someone else who's like back in the days. But the anthropologists and all the people looked up to it and then figured out that this is not the product of that, any people. It's a very, very accidentally made product by the nature. Let's say, oh, so this is not made by anyone who's like person with intention or to create something, but accidental product of nature, then this becomes not an artwork. So what's the distinction between when it was considered an art and when it's not considered an art? The distinction is made upon the fact that was there a making process involved or not. And this experience of making is very important for the creator itself and also the perceiver, because he gives an example of the epicure, the person who enjoys food, like who savors the food with great knowledge and great appreciation. So what distinguishes normal people to epicure is normal people can taste a really delicious food and say like, wow, this is delicious. That's it. And then the difference between them is epicure will, of course, savor the food and think it's delicious, but he or she has the knowledge of how this food was made, where the ingredients were grown, and how this was come about to this dish, and he knows the process, the making of it. And that draws the line between the normal people who appreciate food and then the epicure, because he or she knows about the process. And that is very important. So, to move on, when can the experience have aesthetic qualities and when can it not have an aesthetic quality? So, of course, when it can have is when we know the process of that making. But the one that cannot have an aesthetic quality is when we are overwhelmed by the feelings of strong feelings, such as negative strong feelings like extreme anger, extreme fear, extreme jealousy. When we are suppressed and overwhelmed by those emotions, when it's too overwhelmed, we cannot have an aesthetic experience because we are overwhelmed by those emotions. So this again tells us that we need to have a balance and some sense of settlement, because if we are overwhelmed or if we're underwhelmed, then this cannot give us the balance that we need for the experience to have. So, in the Genesis from the Bible, there's a part where God creates the world. Day 1, day 2, he does that, and then on the day 7, he looks at it and then say, this looks good. And just like this, artists' production of their artwork also finishes when they think that it looks good, whatever good you think it means. Good doesn't just mean one thing, right? Yeah. And then also, when we cannot express our inner feelings, and I'll say this in a very understandable form. I don't know the English expression, but when we are overwhelmed or when we receive this events in our life that creates emotions within us, for example, someone said like bad thing to me, and like someone cheated on me, and then I feel like I feel cheated, and I feel like wow, like there are a lot of feelings inside, right, when we go through that kind of experience. And for example, another example would be, let's say you get dumped, or you are ghosted by someone, or things like that. And like, let's talk about the negative things, because when those things hit us, we have a feelings that's automatically generated within that experience. And if those feelings cannot be expressed in the way that our body wants us to express, then it also creates a incompleted experience. So he says it like this: physiologically and functionally, sense organs are motor organs and are connected by means of distribution of energies in the human body, and not merely anatomically with other organs. So, if the sensory organ doesn't get to express what it has received and feeling, what this organ perceived remains incompleted. So, the moral of the story is we need to at least like express this in one way or the other, ideally a wise way, a good way for us to heal or something. If we just keep it in, it's gonna create some sort of cancer inside you. Emotional cancer, real stuff, like stress, and those feelings can do a lot of things to you. So be careful. And then he says this: it is no linguistic accident that building, construction, work designate both the process and its finished products. Building is both verb and noun. Construction is both verb and noun. Work is both verb and noun. It has the meaning of the process and the end product. Building something, building a building. Building. Construction. Work. Artist is working on his work. So this is not a linguistic accident. And these words have meanings, both the process of it and the end product of it, because of what we just talked about. And every work of art follows the plan of and pattern of a complete experience, rendering it more intensely and concentratedly felt. So, what it is to really see the art, like really recognize the art, what it is to really appreciate the art in a real sense. A real sense of appreciating art is not just recognizing, but perceiving. And so we're going to talk about perceiving and recognizing, the difference between them. Recognition is the perception arrested before it has a chance to develop freely. And John Dewey said it very smoothly, so I'm going to say this to you. Bare recognition is satisfied when a proper tag or label is attached, proper signifying one that serves a purpose outside of active recognition, as a salesman identifies wares by a sample. So, let me just go with the meaning of perception and then I'll come back. Perception. Okay. Perception replaces bare recognition. There is an active reconstructive doing. A consciousness becomes fresh and alive. This act of seeing involves the cooperation of motor elements, even though they remain implicit and do not become overt, as well as cooperation of all funded ideas that may serve to complete the new picture that is forming. But an active perception precedes the waves that extend serially throughout the entire organism. There is therefore no such thing as perception as seeing or hearing plus emotion. The perceived object or scene is emotionally pervaded throughout. So, give you an example. We walk on the street and then I bump into someone, but I feel like I do know this person. And I'm just thinking about whether I should say hi or not. And I see him or her, and then I just made a decision like, do I know her? Do I know him? And then I just don't ignore him and then go. That is recognition. I just recognize that person, but I don't do anything. Then we're doing just the recognizing, not the perceiving part. Perceiving is recognizing and thereafter. What it means is perceiving something means we're actively involving like our own emotion and thoughts into it. So if I bump into someone that I think I know, and then I say like, oh wow, like oh, this person, yeah, I know, like it's been like years and then I haven't met you. This getting to know this person is perceiving. And the reason why we're going through the definition of the recognition and the perception is because real perception is the way that we should view artwork. So, John Dewey wants us to do this. This is his advice to us, to perceive things, not just in artwork, perceive our life. To steep ourselves in a subject matter, we have first to plunge into it. When we are only passive to a scene, it overwhelms us, and for lack of answering activity, we do not perceive that which bears us down. We must summon energy and pitch it as responsive key in order to take in. Everyone knows that it requires apprenticeship to see through a microscope or a telescope and to see a landscape as a geologist sees it. The idea that the aesthetic perception is an affair for odd moments is one reason for backwardness of the art amongst us. So, we really need to engage ourselves into some things that we want to really understand. So, that's our homework for life. And to perceive, a beholder must create his own experience. This is another thing that I want to have a discussion session with other people. So, he says, perceiving, a real true perceiving, for that we need to create an experience that is more or less equivalent of the one that artist created for the artwork. And his creation must include relations comparable to those which the original producer underwent. What this means is, let's say there is an artist A who created this artwork A that he made after the earthquake. I'm talking about actually Ai Weiwei. And we see that artwork and like, if we don't have the experience of it, like we're like a little bit baffled. Like there are like loads of things in front of us that doesn't have any meaning to us because we don't know what it means. But thankfully, there's a TV right next to it explaining that earthquake that one part of the China went through, and then he wants to recreate that sensation, emotion. So he collected this is no longer a hypothetical scenario. Okay, I went to an exhibition in 2015 at Royal Academy in London, Ai Weiwei's exhibition, and there was this installation that was like literally steel poles, like stacks of it were there, and I was like, oh, what is this? And next to it there was a TV explaining how the creation of it and everything, and because of that I understood there was this accident, the earthquake in this part of the China, and because the school was built so loosely, the construction, like the steel poles were not connected properly when they were making the basis of it, everybody died. So he wanted to make us feel that sorrow and how the lack of attention to details and building a construction can lead us to this type of tragedy. He pulled out all the steel poles from that from that school, and like all the crunched up steel poles, and then he straightened up, not he but like their team straightened up all their steel poles, and yeah, and that's all the steel poles are very straight. I'll attach a photo here, and that poles are like incredibly, like, it's too many. And when I understood the story and when I saw the making process, I was like, wow, like I have goosebumps. I still, like, right now I have goosebumps. And this is really perceiving it. Even though I didn't gone through an earthquake, thankfully, I went through a indirect experience through that considerate documentary they made for that artwork. So this is just one example. It doesn't have to be a real artwork. We can appreciate our food that our parents make for us, the book that's written from this person who went through a great tragedy. Like, we can appreciate everything by trying to understand them. Basically, we need to try to understand them. That's the key point of it. We can just see things and, like, not appreciate. We need to see the small. That needs apprenticeship. That's what he's saying. Like, why do we think that only the scientists and, like, the people with, like, tests or, like, professors and things like that needs to apprenticeship to become that? We need to also grow our eyes to understand those things. And to understand, we need to get ourselves exposed to many things. We need to observe things in a different way that we never did. So, and then he says, an experience, real one, is consisted of 3 aspects. 1 is emotional. 2nd, intellectual. 3rd is practical. I'll give you a good example of this. I go to gym every morning or on the weekdays, and not every day I do want to go to gym. Like maybe it's like freezing cold outside, or it's something, and I feel like, oh, I don't want to go. And let's say this is an experience of me who don't want to go to gym because it's freezing outside and I feel like pain in my muscle and I don't want to go, but then I go. Let's say that, and then I went there, and then it, like, somehow miraculously I done more and better than I usually did, and I feel this great sense of achievement, and I feel like, wow, like it's such a great thing that I overcame and stuff like that. Let's say that experience, me going to gym even though I didn't want it to, and then feeling a great sense of accomplishment, that experience. I'll dissect it into 3 aspects. Emotional part of it is, I first feel like agony, like this frustration and lots and lots of frustrations, and then I go through it, and then I feel like this sense of joy, happiness, sense of achievement, all that stuff. This part is the emotional aspect. So emotional aspect binds parts together into a single whole, single experience. And intellectual part within this experience is, I will learn that, so even though I don't want to do something, if I overcome that phase, I may go through a great sense of achievement. So maybe next time when I encounter something that I don't want to do, maybe I will do it because it might give me a great sense of joy. That's the intellectual part. So intellectual parts lets the experience to have a meaning. And the practical side is me going to workouts and coming back is the practical side. Practical indicates that the organism is interacting with the events and objects with the which surrounds it. So, what's 3 parts that consists consummatory experience? Intellectual, emotional, intellectual, and practical. So you can think of any other any experience that you've gone through, any, like, whether it's small or big, and think, like, you can dissect those into three. Did I learn something from it? That will be the intellectual part. What I felt will be the emotional part, and what you've done is the practical part. So we're almost done. I'm going to talk about what consists, two components that consists the consummatory experience. Okay. Two things consists consummatory experience. One is a certain form, and second is a rhythm. And I'm going to read it out. Yeah, I'm going to read it out to you. So I said the first ingredient that consists consummatory experience is the form. In every integral experience, there's a form because there is dynamic organization. I call the organization dynamic because it takes time to complete it. Because it is a growth. There is an inception, development, fulfillment. Material is ingested and digested through interaction with that vital organization of the result of prior experience that constitutes the mind of the worker. Incubation goes on until what is conceived is brought forth and is rendered perceptible as part of the common world. An aesthetic experience can be crowded into a moment only in the sense that a climax of prior long-enduring process may arrive in an outstanding movement which so sweeps everything else into it that all else is forgotten. That which distinguishes an experience as aesthetic is conversion of resistance and tensions of excitations, and in themselves are temptation to diversion into a movement towards an inclusive and fulfilling close. So, okay. Form is required. There's certain form that you go through something and then you have the incubation phase, which I prior mentioned as a ruminating or like pausing phase. You need to go through the cycle of things to go through a consummatory experience. You cannot just do. You cannot just receive. You cannot just like stay still, because that is not doing anything. And then the another component of consummatory experience is a rhythm. Just like a bird who's flying, not only flying, but they sit on the branch. They cannot only fly. They cannot only sit on the branch. They need to go through that rhythm. And people are the same too, in order to create an experience that's completed. And the important part is here. When only, let's see. Okay, so if we move too rapidly and if we just rest, both are not doing any good for us, right? So here he says it like this. If we move too rapidly, we get away from the base of supplies. Like we're making an army example. In an army, if we move too rapidly, we get away from the base of supplies of occurred meanings, and the experience is flustered, thin, and confused. But if we just rest, if we dawdle too long after having extracted the net value, experience perishes of a nation. In any nation. In a nation. It's a SAT word. Inactiveness. So, to put it into another word, okay, this is the last citing that I'm going to do, and then I'm going to give you my opinion, and then I'll finish this video. An object is peculiarly and dominantly aesthetic, yielding the enjoyment of characteristic of the aesthetic perception when the factors that determine everything which can be called an experience are lifted high above the thresholds of perception and are made manifest for their own sake. So he writes so difficultly. Easily put, these components, the forms and rhythm that consists the experience, the real experience, we not only recognize them, but we perceive them and we make it into our own, and we create the meaning for ourselves. That's very important. For example, a good movie directors know how to convey a message to us. I mentioned I never mentioned Miyazaki. I'll give you 2 examples. So Christopher Nolan, he will give us example. He'll make us to think about the time and like what's important and stuff like that. And Miyazaki Hayao, the Ghibli studio, he will make us think about like, are we really living our own life with our own intention, or are we living someone else's dogma, stuff like that. So get a good message out of the thing that you are perceiving and receiving and recognizing, because if we just see things as it is, we're never going to learn, we're never going to grow. So to put it into my own words, I think having an experience is creating a relationship between whatever that is, whether it's a thing or a person. We're creating a relationship between me and you, and me and you. Why? Because experience itself is like that. If I go through a certain experience, and if I don't learn from it, if I just be like that, like let's say I go through a very traumatic experience that made me like cry and like not get out of bed for like 3 weeks and things like that, then when that's over, and when I feel like, oh, I could again live my life, and if I don't pause and think about what it means and how I should be living, then that experience is meaningless. And it's so useless because you've gone through all that painful time and you don't want to learn anything from it. Why? You should learn something from it. If you don't want to, like passionately don't want to learn from it, then don't. But I think nobody wants to not learn from it, because it's gonna make your life the more difficult, because you're gonna go through the same shit over and over again. So this is the last reference that I want to make is in the Little Prince in that book. The Little Prince lives in his own small planet and have his beautiful rose, and he takes care of that rose, like he protects it, waters it, and stuff like that. And when he comes to Earth, he cries, he bursts into cry, because he comes to Earth and see that there are so many roses in the fields. It's like jillion roses. And he's like crying because, oh my god, I thought my rose was one and only special one, and then she was just only one of these jillion roses. And then the fox comes along, with a wise and all-knowing fox, and he comes to the Little Prince and says like how to tame, and by taming he means how to build a relationship, how to love. And then he says, the fox says, to tame something or someone is becoming only one person or one fox among gajillion people, gajillion foxes. And having a relationship with someone is becoming a special someone for each other, and that gives us happiness, and that gives us bliss. And you will learn something that you will never be able to learn when you never loved anyone, and that's taming. So I believe that we are taming a relationship between what we see and what we perceive, and we make it our own only by really trying to plunge into it, as John Dewey puts it. So it's very important, right? So it was a very long and arduous content for me to make. Actually, like, I don't know why it took me so long. Maybe I was a bit down. But this is the message that I want to give to you, and because I love you guys, whoever is watching, so I'm going to give you one last reference. Do you know a movie director, David Lynch? In one speech, he said something like this: if you have a golf ball size of perception of the world, you will see the world through that size of window. But if you have Earth-sized perception of seeing the world, you will, of course, perceive the world with that horizon. So go out, explore. Mark Twain said to us, like, you will be disappointed by the things that you didn't do rather than the things you did do in 20 years. So go out, explore, dream, whatever, sail, and like get out from the safe harbor, not Harvard, harbor. And this is the advice that I want to give to you and for me, myself too, because we are always in this zone that we want to be safe. We want to not experience that much. We want to be settled. Everybody likes settling so much. Like everybody wants to get settled and like have a settled house, settled wives, settled whatever. But you can only grow by moving out from your comfort zone. And of course it's hella scary. But that's the only way. And that's how we should be living if we want to live a better and quality life that will lead us to become a better person, which means other people will be also inspired by us, and it's just better in every aspect. If you don't want, like, it's still fine, but if you want to grow, if you want to improve, if you want to be the best version of you, I highly, strongly recommend both you and me to do so. Let's strive on to that. So until next time, I'll see you guys, and have a great weekend and left of the weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye.